Hi, my name's Emily and I'm an illustrator and ceramic artist from the Gold Coast. I'd like to welcome you to my online pet portrait tutorial. This is a fun tutorial where we'll get to play with different art materials and different illustration techniques to create a portrait of your pet. Now if you don't have a pet, that's totally okay, neither do I. So I found lots of pictures of my dream pet on the internet and you can do that too. You'll need a picture of a pet, pencils, paper, colouring pencils and pens to participate in this tutorial. If you also have paints and a paintbrush, we can use those too. If you don't, that's okay. I found that using spices and a few things from the kitchen cupboard can also work really well as watercolours. We can use turmeric, paprika, cocoa powder, tea or food dye to make watercolours. If you don't have a paintbrush, that's okay. You can use an old makeup brush or cotton buds. Okay, so before we get started on this tutorial today, I'd like to remind you that it's okay if it doesn't turn out perfectly. What we're going to do today is if you make a mistake, don't use a rubber, put the rubbers away, draw over the top of your illustration. We're going to keep going with our illustration until we're finished, even if you don't like what's going on. Once you've finished, if you don't like it, don't scrunch up the paper and throw it away. That's a waste of paper. Draw right next to it. Keep going. This is what I do all of the time and it's helped me to learn as an illustrator to get better and to correct my mistakes. So when you start drawing your pet, start with the main shapes. So let's have a look at your pet's head and see what shape it is. Is it long and skinny, round and fat? Is it wide? Is it triangular? Does it have a pointy nose? Draw the main shape as a reference point and start adding the main features such as the eyes, nose, mouth and ears. Let's have a look at all of those shapes and see how they relate to each other. Are the eyes close to the top of the head or are they closer to the nose? Are the ears close together or are they far apart? All of these things can help you work out a good proportion of your pet. I'm also starting to look at things like shadows, where shadows sit around the nose, ears and eyes, the pet's eyebrows, any key features such as markings like stripes or patches of different coloured fur, and things like mouth shape, nose shape. And just keep drawing and drawing your pet over and over again, doing lots of sketches, learning about what your pet looks like. This all helps you to get a good sense of your pet. You might also need to take a few photos of your pet if they're moving around too much, but it can be a fun activity to do lots of quick sketches if they are moving, so you can do a bit of both. So remember, when you're sketching, these sketches don't have to be perfect. Try to keep going with your sketch even if you're not happy, and just try and draw over your mistakes if you're making any mistakes, because this is what helps us to learn from our mistakes. When we start adding colour, I'm still using the same sketching techniques, and then I'm just starting to use colours to shade in the fur and shadows. So pick lighter colours, start lighter because it's always easier to make your artwork darker. Shade in the fur lightly and then start to add darker features and darker lines gradually. You can also use colours like blue and green or black to lightly shade in different shades of shadows around your pet, and just looking for different colours in the fur and markings. Okay, I found a few things from my kitchen cupboard. I have turmeric, cocoa powder, tea and paprika. And I found that if you mix a little bit of water with each of these to make a paste, they work really well as a watercolour paint. You can just paint straight onto the paper. And if you see all these grainy, spicy bits, they actually rub off later once the artwork is dry. So I've added a little bit of water to my spices and tea, and I'm using the colours to paint straight onto watercolour paper. I'm painting my pet silhouettes, and this is helping me to see the shape as a whole and see the outline of the pet. And it's a fun technique to play with because we can start to draw over the top of these silhouettes once we're finished. So here I'm painting with food dye, and I've put a few drops of food dye onto a plate, and I'm dipping my brush into the water and then into the food dye before I start painting with it. I'm also mixing different colours with each other as I paint, and they blend together to create a multicoloured effect. You can go a bit crazy with your colours here. Remember, your pet doesn't have to be an actual pet colour. It can be red or pink or blue. We can still make a really cool portrait using any colours we have. If you have watercolour paper, I recommend using it as it will help to keep your paper smoother. If not, it will still work really well on plain paper. However, you'll get a few more crinkles in your paper, but you can just put your finished artwork into a heavy book once it's dry. This one I've done with turmeric, this one with paprika, this one with cocoa powder, and this one with tea. And then I've used pencil lines and pen lines to finish it off. These ones I've used food dye and made a mix of different colours to create a cool kind of look, and then I've drawn over the top with pencil to finish it off. So you can paint using all of these household materials and make a cool finished look. This is what it starts off with, and then I've drawn over the top of it like that. Before we start drawing onto our silhouettes, we want to make sure they're 100% dry. Then you should wipe them off with a cloth to get rid of any excess grit and spices. So here I'm just shading in over the top of the silhouettes that we made in the same way that we added colour earlier on. So I'm starting out by shading in the fur colour and sketching out the main features such as the eyes, nose and mouth. If you lightly sketch over them, you have more room for error and to correct your errors. You can see how I'm just redrawing over and over different lines and making them gradually darker as I get more confident with where they are. I'm also just starting to add in some shadows gradually and looking for where those shadows sit on the pet. Then I've gone in and added some black pen to emphasize some key features such as the eyes, nose, and mouth. So first I sketch out the silhouette of my pet and the key features such as the eyes, nose and mouth. I'm using lighter colours, so I'm using a lot of white in my paint, and to get the main covering of fur colour for the pet silhouette. And I'm just going around those key features. So to make the Pomeranian's fur, I'm using a little bit of reddy brown and a bit of yellowy brown and mixing it into my white, and then I'm painting it on the paper. So you might need to spend some time playing on a spare piece of paper before you start if you want to do watercolour, just to work out what colours make your pet's fur colour. There are lots of different ways to use watercolours. I really like to use my watercolours quite dry, so I'm only dipping the tip of my paintbrush in water and then rubbing them around in my paints. And this creates a nice thick coating on my paintbrush. For my shadow colours, I'm just adding a little bit of grey or black to my fur colour, so it's less intense than painting black or grey straight on top of it, and it blends in with the fur better. Then I'm gradually adding in darker shadows and strokes of fur. So I've noticed my Pomeranian has some dark shadows on its ears and around the corners of its mouth and a little bit under its chin. I found that mixing purple and green makes a really nice grey as a base for black pets or for eyes, nose and mouth features. I work with my paint quite wet when I want to blend colours, but if your paint is too wet when you add the darker shades, it'll all blend together. So you might need to wait for your painting to dry before you add in the dark features such as the eyes, nose and mouth. I'm also adding a few white highlights, so when you see your pet, you might see that it has a shiny spot on the nose or some shiny spots on the eyes, and that's where you might add a little bit of white. You might like to have a think about what decorations you would like to put around your pet portrait at the end. So do a few sketches on another piece of paper of some different flowers or some of your pet's favourite things and come up with a plan. Once you've figured that out, you might want to sketch them onto the paper if you're not confident to paint them in freehand. Thank you so much for taking part in my online pet portrait tutorial. There's a couple of things that I hope you've taken away from today. Number one, learning how to sketch and observe your pet. You can do this by looking for different shapes in your pet and how they relate to each other. For example, do the pet's ears sit far apart or close together? Are the eyes at the top of the head or closer to the nose? 2. Adding colour. You can start by lightly sketching out the eyes, nose and key features of your pet, and then slowly add your colours from lighter to darker shades. It's much easier to get darker in your shades than go back to lighter. 3. Silhouettes. Drawing your pet's silhouette can really help you to see the whole shape of your pet and to understand where the outline of the pet is. Okay, finally, let's put it all together. Start with a silhouette and then lightly sketch in your key features, whatever technique you're using. And then finally build up your shades from lightest to darkest, finishing with your key features such as your nose, eyes and mouth using darker, stronger lines. Thank you so much again for joining me. Now let's start drawing our pets. Thank you, bye!